What's up, guys? Welcome back, man. Hope you guys are doing well. I miss you guys so much. I know I say that every single week, but I seriously do miss you guys. I can't tell you that in person. But man, I miss you guys. I hope you guys are doing well. I hate the situation, so I hope it gets over soon. But hey, just a few announcements. Happy Sunday, but just a few announcements. This Wednesday, we're having a student-led Wednesday night. Okay, so some of your students are going to be leading the service. It's going to be super exciting. There's some things that came up that just were brought to my attention just recently, but we're still going to try to make it happen. Man, invite someone. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be playing games and chilling. So this Wednesday at 6:30, it's going to be on YouTube Live. Okay, YouTube Live again. So I'm seriously looking forward to that. Also, continue praying for Karen. You know, she's obviously a nurse, and she's in some hot spots, and so she's definitely going to be around the virus and things like that. So please be praying for her. Be praying for her health and her coworkers as well. Man, be praying for some good news for this situation, man. I'm praying that it ends quickly. I'm praying that it ends soon, but be praying for some good news. Also, just a few other things. Man, invite someone. Invite someone to our Wednesday night service. Listen, everyone is at home. Church is all online. There's no reason anyone should miss church. Okay? Man, invite someone to watch with you. It's going to be on YouTube Live, so they don't have to show their face. It's not a Zoom meeting. They don't have to show their face. They can just come on, play some comment games with us, and hear the gospel. I hope that you'll invite someone because it's super easy. No one should be missing church. There's no excuse, right? If your friends try to give you an excuse, just be like, that's not a good excuse. Sorry, you're coming, you know. But also, as of right now when I'm recording this, I don't know who has won our photo scavenger hunt challenge. But I'm sure it's someone super awesome, okay? Someone super awesome has won the challenge. But I'm going to be coming out with a new challenge this week. I'll be posting the challenge tomorrow, which would be Monday. And I don't have the details all ironed out yet, but I'm super excited about this next challenge. It should be a lot of fun. So be paying attention to our Instagram at PABC Youth for the details on that. It's going to be super, super awesome, okay? So, hey, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be in the book of Daniel. Okay, we're going to be reading Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 16. Just a few things. We're starting a new series on Sundays about faith, and I'm super excited about it. Listen, if you engage with us, if you take part in these studies, I promise you God will speak to you. I promise you God will speak to you. If you open up your heart, if you engage and don't just like fall asleep while we're talking about it. If you come to small group and discuss things, God wants to speak to you through this new faith series on Sundays. So I hope that you'll do that, okay? But I'm going to read Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 16. Let me give just a little bit of background before we get into it. There's a lot of, but the king of Judah is where this story takes place. So the king, it's really complicated. But the king of Judah is kind of a part of Israel. Okay, it's a split off of Israel, but they're still considered God's people. So it's kind of complicated. But if I accidentally say Israel or Judah, just know that those two are the purposes of the story are kind of interchangeable. Okay, but this takes place in the kingdom of Judah, and King Jehoiakim is the king currently, and he's an evil king. He taxes his people unfairly. He betrays his own people. And he's just an evil king. The Bible talks about how evil of a king that he is. But in this story, King Nebuchadnezzar is the king over Babylon. And Babylon comes in and takes over the kingdom of Judah. So King Nebuchadnezzar is now the king of Judah. He's taken over the kingdom of Judah. And so what's happened is King Nebuchadnezzar wants to bring in some people and indoctrinate them Nebuchadnezzar wants to bring in some people of Judah and teach them the ways of the Babylonians. Okay, so he wants to teach them the gods they worship. He wants to teach them the food that they eat. He wants to teach them their customs and the way they do things. And so obviously there's going to be a conflict there with God's people. But that's what's happening. Nebuchadnezzar is going to take young men from the kingdom of Judah and try to indoctrinate them, and he has a 3-year program for them to change them over and to make them worship his idols and his gods. Okay, so let's look at Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 16. I'll read it, and then we'll come back verse by verse, okay? Verse 8 says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, 'I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you.' Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, 'Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see.' So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. Verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead." Okay, so let's go back to verse 8. This is a super relevant story, I think, to even students today. We're going to look at this. So again, Nebuchadnezzar has brought in some young men. He actually has a decree where he's like, I want young men who are of nobility, who are good looking, who are in shape, who are really smart, who are really capable. I want to bring these men in and teach them the ways of the Babylonians. Okay, so what that means is Nebuchadnezzar was going to feed them meat that was sacrificed to gods. King Nebuchadnezzar was going to feed them wine and things like that. However, God had decreed, our God said earlier in the Old Testament that his people should not eat meat sacrificed to gods. His people should not drink this type of drink. Okay, so that's what God had said. And so Daniel and his 3 bros, okay, it's actually Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They have different names here, but their names are changed. But Daniel and his 3 bros knew what God had said and knew God's will for their life. And they knew they weren't supposed to eat this stuff. Okay, so Daniel and his bros were in the population that Nebuchadnezzar brought in. So Nebuchadnezzar brings these guys in, and look at verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. This is a really awesome verse, and I want us to think about this. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself. Daniel resolved. I'm super glad that the scriptures use the word resolve. Do you know what resolved means? Like, have you ever heard of a New Year's resolution? So, like, a New Year's resolution is like, when it comes New Year's, you're like, I don't know what's going to happen this year, but I vow to lose weight, or I vow to not drink pop again, or I vow to, win a Fortnite game or something, I don't know, stuff like that. But that's a New Year's resolution, okay? And what that is you are resolving to do something regardless of what happens in that year, okay? The word resolved here, but Daniel resolved here means he has made up his mind before he even knows what's going to happen. He has made up his mind that no matter what I'm asked to do, I am not going to break God's plan for my life. I am not going to break God's will for my life. And that's super important for us to think about. New Year's resolutions probably wasn't a good illustration because how often are New Year's resolutions kept? Not very often. But you get the idea, right? To make a resolve about something or to be resolved about something is to say, no matter what happens, I'm going to do this. And that's what Daniel's saying. He says, no matter what happens, no matter what they ask of me, I am not going to break God's will for my life. I'm not going to break God's plan. Okay, so let's continue on. I'm going to read verse 8 and verse 9. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Verse 9. Now God caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Okay, so stop this real quick, right here. So Daniel knew that God did not want him to eat this type of meat, did not want him to drink this type of drink that they were going to feed him. And so he goes to ask the official, like, hey, listen, can me and my guys just eat vegetables? Can we not eat this food? This is not for us. We're not going to eat this food. And look at verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Check this out. God was already working behind the scenes on this. God was working behind the scenes. Question, could Daniel see God working on this person with his own eyes? Probably. Okay, Daniel probably couldn't see, oh yeah, God is changing this official. I can see him changing him right now. I'm going to go talk to him. That's probably not what happened. God was working behind the scenes, and Daniel probably didn't even know that God was working behind the scenes in that way. And that's a really interesting point because, listen, God is always at work. God is always at work. Just because we can't see God at work, just because we can't feel God at work all the time, doesn't mean that he's not working. He's working behind the scenes. There are times in our life when we feel like we are just completely separate. We feel like God is silent. We feel like God is not moving in our lives. We feel like, that we just feel like God is completely silent and is not moving at all. That's not true. Just because we can't feel God moving does not mean he's not moving. He is working behind the scenes, and he was working behind the scenes in this situation for Daniel. Okay, I'm going to read verses 9 and 10. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Verse 10, but the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. So the official is saying, listen, I hear you, Daniel, and I love you, and I want to do that for you, but I can't because I'm worried about what the king would do to me if he saw you looking weaker than the other men. So he's scared of King Nebuchadnezzar. Let's look at verse 11. Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Verse 13, then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So Daniel's like, hey, how about you just test us out for 10 days? Just 10 days. Give them what you would normally give them. Give us just water and vegetables and see what we look like at the end of 10 days. And then you do what is right. Well, you do what you think you should do. Compare us at the end of the 10 days and see who's better. It's interesting. He's like, dude, just try it out. Just try it. Now, remember, this program that Nebuchadnezzar has these young men in is 3 years. It's 3 years. It spans 3 years. So 10 days is not a super significant amount of time in that span of 3 years. So Daniel's like, hey, just try it out for 10 days and see what happens. So look at verse 14. So he agreed, the official agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. Now let's look at verses 15 and 16. This is where it really gets awesome. Verse 15. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. Check this out. Excuse me. Check this out. During those 10 days, they only ate vegetables. Now, think about this. They were probably in the mess hall eating with everybody, right? Daniel and his boys were probably eating with everybody, everyone around. Do you think that everyone else kind of made fun of them, gave them a hard time, probably picked on them a little bit? I think they probably did. So everyone else is probably like, dude, Daniel, why aren't you eating the meat? Meat's good. I got this nice, juicy, rare steak over here for you to eat. Why aren't you eating it? They probably got picked on. They probably got made fun of. The other guys probably said, hey, man, just drink a little bit of it. It's not that big of a deal. They probably said, listen, God has abandoned us. God has given our kingdom over to the Babylonians. So why does it matter to you anymore? Why are you trying to follow God's plan when God doesn't even care anymore? So they probably got picked on, and they probably got told things like, hey, just try this. Just try a little bit of it. It's not going to hurt. Just a little bit. Just try a little bit. But the reason they didn't cave into that temptation is because they resolved to follow God's plan for their life. They resolved to follow God's will for their life. Okay? Listen, man. When we go to school, we see TV, we watch TV, we see things on social media, and everyone is saying, hey, that doesn't matter. Do this fun stuff. Stop following God. He doesn't really care. Do this, just do this little thing. It's not that big of a deal. It's a small thing. Just do this little thing. It's not going to hurt. Listen, man, we can't listen to that. We can't listen to that stuff. We have to resolve to follow God's plan for our life, okay? Even when we get picked on a little bit, we have to have a stronger faith in that. We have to be able to resolve and say, hey, I'm going to follow God's plan no matter what. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego chose to follow God's plan even in the midst of persecution, okay? Let's look at verse 17. Verse 16 and 17. So the guard took away their choice food. The guard saw that they were stronger and better equipped than everyone else. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. Verse 17. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Listen, okay, you've heard the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why is that story awesome? They were thrown into the fire and they didn't burn. Okay? In fact, Nebuchadnezzar saw someone else in the fire with them. Okay? Daniel goes on to be thrown into a lion's den later in the story and does not get eaten. Listen, these young men, keep in mind they're young. Okay, these young men go on to do these crazy awesome things for God. And check this out. Do you think those awesome things would have happened if they didn't start with the little things right here? I would be willing to bet that no, they wouldn't have happened. Because, listen, Daniel and his boys resolved to say, listen, I'm going to follow God's plan for my life no matter what. I'm going to follow the little things and I'm going to follow the big things. And they chose to follow God no matter what. Listen, a lot of students are saying, well, I'm going to do great things for God when I'm older. I'm not going to worry about God right now, but when I get older, then I'll change and then I will follow God. That's not how it works. A lot of scholars think that these men were 13, 14, 15, maybe 16 years old. Okay? And what that tells me is like, listen, your faith doesn't start down the road. What that tells me is that it doesn't happen just when you're an adult. Listen, right now is the time to make the resolution to follow Christ no matter what. And it's not just, what this also tells me is that God doesn't just care about the big things. He cares about the little things in your life too. The little things. Daniel and his men resolved to say, hey, I'm going to follow God with the small things now. And listen, with you, with our students, it starts right now. Okay, it starts right now. There is no, well, I will have faith when I get older, or there's no, well, I will follow God when I get older. That's not how it works. It starts right now. Right now. These men go on to legitimately rock King Nebuchadnezzar's world. Okay, because he loses his mind. Like, well, you would lose your mind too if you saw men thrown into a blazing furnace that didn't burn up, and then all of a sudden another man was in the fire with them. You would lose your mind. They go through, and that blows King Nebuchadnezzar's mind. King Nebuchadnezzar throws Daniel into a lion's den overnight, and then he comes out and with not even a scratch on him. And that blows King Nebuchadnezzar's mind. Listen, man. That stuff would not have happened if they didn't follow God in the small things here. And that's what I want you to understand. Listen, it's not down the road. It's you start right now. It's starting right now. Let's look at verses 18 through 20, and then I'll wrap up. At the end of this time, remember it was 3 years, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Listen, Nebuchadnezzar tried to bring them in and indoctrinate them to follow all these other gods, to follow all these other customs. And Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego weren't affected. That didn't shake their faith because they had resolved that they would follow Christ no matter what. Listen, you'll be talking with friends. You'll be talking with coworkers or whatever. And they'll be like, well, blah, 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 blah. Why don't you just do this little thing? Just forget about following Christ. Just forget about all that stuff and just do this little thing over here. If you have not resolved to follow Christ, you're going to crumble in situations like that. You might get into theological debates with people who have different belief systems to you, atheists, whatever. If you have not resolved to follow Christ, you will crumble in those situations. Not that you're going to out-debate someone, but that your faith will be rocked if you haven't resolved to follow Christ. Listen, Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego resolved to follow Jesus with the small things. No matter what, they're going to follow God's plan for their life with the small things. And that gave them the ability to do big things for God. And that's the same thing with you. Listen, resolve now to follow God with the small things in your life. It's not later, it's now. Resolve now to follow God with the small things in your life. So we're going to end right there. I hope you guys have a great discussion in your small groups. I love you guys and miss you guys.